Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers. We're back with, you guessed it, another video, and today we got a fun topic. We're going to be talking about replayable video games.
Now, the idea of replaying something isn't exactly new. It's been around really as long as media has been around. If you like a song, you'll replay it. If you like a movie or a TV show, you'll replay it. You'll watch it again. And if you like a game, you'll replay it and play it again. And there's a variety of reasons why you'd want to replay a game. Maybe you just love that experience and you want to experience it again. Maybe the game was just so much fun, or the gameplay loops were so addicting that you want to live it all over again. But then there's the games that actually encourage replayability, where they want you to play it again. They want you to experience it a slightly different way. Maybe a certain situation or task can be completed in several different ways, and different outcomes can actually be achieved. Maybe there's different endings or different results depending on what actions you take. And then of course there's replayable games where you just want to get the highest score, and if you get really raw at the game actually really rewards you. That's what we're talking about today, the games that are worth replaying. There's plenty of games that aren't worth replaying, and there's plenty of games that I think you should only play through once. Maybe that's another video in the future, but today we're talking about those replayable games that you can play through several times. I got 20 entries for this list spanning many generations of games, and this list is in no particular order. I've also played all of these games myself. I can personally vet for them, tell you they're good, and that they are actually worth replaying. I'm also not going to be including any roguelikes. To be honest, that kind of seems like low-hanging fruit for a video like this, so I'm just not going to include any, but there are plenty of replayable roguelikes like Binding of Isaac, Hades, etc. In the future, I'll probably do a video on those as well. And as always, I have not played every single game ever made. I've played over 2,000, but that's not even close to all of them, so let me know some games I might have missed. Anyway, enough dilly-dallying. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. It is just me working on these videos, playing all of these games. I'm a one-man army, don't got no team or anything like that. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Let me know down below what games you like replaying. I'm really curious to see what everybody says, but let's get into it with the first game. Now, when I started thinking of the most replayable games I've played, one of the games that immediately came to my mind was Star Fox 64. I love Star Fox 64, and I've replayed through this game several times, and the game absolutely encourages it. It is one of those quintessential games when it comes to replaying. The main reason Star Fox 64 is so replayable is how level progression works. Sure, you always start in Corneria, but pretty much right after that, there are several paths you can take. And the way you get to the end of the game can be completely different. I've played through this game like 10 times, and it feels like almost all of them were very different. Some of these levels are drastically different from each other. We're not talking about a different background or some enemies change or maybe there's a secret boss. No, completely different levels. Sometimes you're in a completely different vehicle. There are tons of levels you can miss. You could have a playthrough where you're pretty much only in the R-Wing. You can have one where you're in the Landmaster or the submarine. There's so many good levels in this game. And the only way you're going to get to see all of them is by replaying the game. You can't just do like a level select, you have to do a path along the map. And you'll miss plenty of levels each time you play through the game, so the only way you're going to see them all is by playing through the game several times. There's also tons of secrets in order to get to these other levels, and figuring that out is just another wrinkle when it comes to the replayability. On top of this, the game is like the perfect length for it being as replayable as it is. It's only like an hour or two, so you can do like 2 or 3 runs in just a few hours. And it's short enough to the point where if you have an hour or two and you don't really know what to play, do a quick playthrough of Star Fox 64, and it'll probably be different from that last playthrough you did. This game is always just immensely fun. No matter if it's your first playthrough or your 10th playthrough, the game is just a good time. It's on the N64, it's been re-released several times, there's even the 3DS remake, and the other Star Fox games, while they might be a little replayable, nothing comes close to Star Fox 64. This game, it really is one of those quintessential replayable games. So our next entry is not 1 game, not 2 games, but actually 3 games. It is the Bayonetta trilogy. Now, when it comes to character action games, hack and slash, whatever you want to call it, Bayonetta is a series that is near the very top of that genre, up there with Devil May Cry. These games have fantastic combat, where it can actually get pretty deep thanks to in-depth mechanics, tons of different combos and weapons, and a ranking system. And it's thanks to all of this that these games are actually incredibly replayable. Every combat encounter, really every gameplay sequence gives you a rank, and that rank is based on if you got hit, how fast you were, the difficulty, what kind of combos and moves you were doing, etc, etc. And these games very much incentivize you to do well. They actually reward you even if you do well, and they even encourage you to go back to earlier levels or replay through the entire game to get a higher rank, to get a better score, to do even better. And all of this makes these games worth replaying. This is true across all 3 games, where the first time you play through the game, you're kind of understanding its mechanics, you're getting wowed by the set pieces and spectacle, and of course enjoying the story. But that second time you play through the game, oh, you fully understand the mechanics, you get really good at the game, you're getting good ass platinum medals, and rarely even getting hit, and the game's just loving it, constantly rewarding you, and just kind of going, yeah, you're doing real good. And of course you can find all of the secrets the second time you play through it. And of course, this mindset kind of applies to several games where the second time you play through it, you're way better and you're able to do a bunch of cool stuff. But Bayonetta in particular just encourages that you replay each game a bit more than most. The ranking system, it's pretty good, but the most important thing is that these games are so much fun. These are some of the most fun hack and slash games you could ever play, and I absolutely think that you should try them and then replay them. Go and get all the platinum medals. I think you'll have a great time for any of these 3 games. So for our next game, we got a pretty big RPG here. We got Baldurs Taint 3. Now this game is immensely replayable, not only due to just its high quality, but how many different ways you can approach literally every single character, situation, combat encounter, etc. This is one of the most replayable video games ever made. The game is very long, taking 50 to like 100 hours, and before you start you create a character, and this right here adds a ton of replayability. You get to choose your background, your class, your stats, and like this actually has a real difference on how your character is going to behave, act, and the options you're going to get throughout the entire game. And it's just wild to me how vastly different all of these races and classes are from each other. This alone is just a ton of replayability, but it doesn't end there. Which companions you go with, how you react to said companions, really every quest, every interaction can go several different ways. Some of them, it's not too different, but a few times, oh yeah, you can have some drastically different outcomes. And this is throughout the entire game. It's not, oh, a few key moments, oh, the ending's different. No, literally, like every single interaction can go a different way depending on your background, which characters you have, how you've reacted to this person in the past. Like, it is truly mind-boggling just how many different ways you can approach really everything in this game. I've played through this game twice. They were completely different playthroughs. I had different characters, different outcomes, and I found a bunch of stuff in that second playthrough that I didn't even know was in my first playthrough. And to this day, I'm still seeing clips and memes of Baldur's Gate 3 going, wait, what is that? I never saw that interaction. I never saw anything like that. The first time I played the game, I never even found Dinosaur Island. The second time though, oh yeah, we found Dinosaur Island. This game is just insanely replayable. You could play through this game probably 5 to 10 times and it would still be drastically different in several aspects. Yes, the game is stupid long, but that doesn't change the fact that it is just crazy replayable. You're not going to want to just play through this game once. Even if you have a bazillion games to finish, you're probably going to want to play this game again. I certainly did, and that's why I've never played like any Castlevania game. Unrelated topic. Let's move on. So our next game is The Wolf Among Us. Did someone say AMOGUS? Well, we're not talking about that Among Us, we're talking about Telltale's adventure from about a decade ago. Now, to some extent, all of the Telltale games are replayable. They're all very narrative, story-driven games where you do make choices throughout that can affect the narrative and how characters will treat you, but to be honest, in most Telltale games, it really doesn't affect it that much. Like, it might change an interaction or two, or you might get a slightly different ending, but for the most part, the game is going to tell the story that it's going to tell, and your choices really don't mean that much. But I feel like there are a few exceptions to that rule, and the biggest exception, in my opinion, is The Wolf Among Us, which is maybe my favorite Telltale game of them all. It's based on the Fables comic series, and it stars Bigby Wolf, a sheriff, trying to unravel this really deep mystery, well, more like a conspiracy, and throughout the game you get to make plenty of choices, but again, unlike most Telltale games, these actually really can affect the narrative. It's more than just, oh, this character dislikes you now. It could be something much more drastic than that, and I actually did replay through this entire game after I was done with it because I wanted to see some different options. And they can really genuinely affect your main character. You can be a nice guy and try to help out the Fables and really try to save everyone, or you can just be the biggest piece of shit on earth, and either way, it's incredibly entertaining. A lot can actually change with this story, including the ending, which can be drastically different, and If you were going to replay any Telltale game, I'd recommend this one over them all. It's so good, and I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just going to end it here and say it's worth playing once, it's worth playing twice. So here we got another very replayable RPG, and that's Disco Elysium. Now, Disco Elysium is one of the most interesting RPGs ever made. It's probably my favorite CRPG that is not related to Baldurs Taint, and it has truly some of the best writing of any video game. And you also get to make a ton of choices, and it's incredibly replayable. Despite there not being any combat, you still have plenty of encounters with characters and situations, and you usually have a few different ways of approaching basically everything. Depending on the kind of character you build with your stats or the roll of the dice, the way that the situation unfolds can be rather different from how it was in a previous playthrough. I played through this game and then played through it again and ended up getting like completely different results with nearly every situation, and some of the shit that happens in this game is absolutely hilarious. Like, this game totally lives rent-free in my head to this day just because of how wild and wacky some of these situations are. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything, I'm just going to say that you can approach just about every character, just about every situation in a few different ways, and it's going to be incredibly entertaining. It's also not possible to see every choice that you can make in a playthrough. You're going to have to play through this game more than once if you want to see every choice, every interaction, every outcome. And there's actually a lot of long-term choices where, hey, something you did towards the beginning of the game is affecting the middle or even the end of the game. And on a first-time playthrough, there's really like no way to know that. But this game, it's totally worth replaying just thanks to how many different ways you can approach everything and just how truly wild this game can get. Like, I remember after I beat the game, I was talking to my buddies about it, and they told me what happened to them, and I was like, that was nothing at all what happened to me. That was like completely different. Certain characters behaved a different ways, other characters appeared, and I'm like, what even happened in your playthrough? Like, that is crazy different. Disco, it's one of those games where you can play through it a second time and it can feel like almost a completely new experience in some ways, and for that I absolutely recommend it. And so here we got a Mario game. You knew I couldn't make a list like this and not include a Mario game. Mario has some of the most replayable video games of them all, from Super Mario Bros. To Super Mario Bros. 2, 3, Mario 64, even Mario Wonder is pretty replayable. But when I think of the most replayable Mario game, oh, it's gotta be Mario Odyssey. It was either going to be Odyssey or 64, but I'm going with Odyssey. There's a few reasons why this game is so replayable. One key reason is that there's a lot of different ways to get the main collectible, the moons. There isn't one set way to get most of these moons. If you can master Mario's moveset, you can get a lot of these moons in completely unintended ways. Like, they didn't think you'd do that, but you're really good with Mario's moveset, you can get moving, you could actually reach some of these moons. Mario 64 had this a little bit, but Mario Odyssey really leans in on it, and I think it's cool just how much the game plays into your creativity. Like, hey, if you can think of another way to get this moon, it might actually work. And then, of course, the fact that there is so many moons leads to replayability in itself. Maybe that first playthrough you want to try to get every single one. Sure, go ahead. But you might come back to this game and you go, man, I hated that moon, or I don't want to get that one. You don't have to get every single moon. You don't even need to get like half of them, I don't think. You get to actually very much pick and choose which moons you want to get, leading to some pretty different playthroughs depending on what you try to do. Of course, if you try to 100% the game every single playthrough, they're all going to turn out pretty similar. But the beauty of Mario Odyssey is that there is so many moons that, yeah, you don't have to get them all, and the ones that you do get, you really get to pick and choose, and then there's different ways to even get those. You also get to really choose the order of the moons you want outside of the first like level or two. You don't have to get like any of the moons in any particular order. You can get them whenever you want. Mario 64 also had this, but I think Odyssey really does excel when it comes to this. I've played through this game more than once, and the second time I played through it, I was like, yeah, I don't feel like getting a bunch of these moons, and I ended up going for just the moons that I thought were the most enjoyable and had a relatively different experience from that first one. The game's also, you know, really freaking good, so that certainly helps. It's absolutely a masterclass when it comes to platformers, and if you haven't tried it by now, I really don't know what you're waiting on. So for this entry, I have not one game, not two games, not three games, I just have an entire series, and that is the Fallout series. When thinking about the most replayable games of all time, the Fallout series pretty much showed up immediately. Whether it was Fallout 1, 2, 3, 4, New Vegas, and even parts of 76, these games are insanely replayable. And it's not just because the core gameplay is as good as it is, or that the sense of exploration is pretty solid in really all of them. It's because there's so many choices to make throughout these games. Literally, all the way back from the original, the game lets you make choices. And oftentimes, these choices can actually affect the game. It can affect how factions view you. You can even get completely different endings. You get to create a character at the start, and your stats will actually mean something for the most part, until you become, just good at everything. But for the most part, the stats actually do mean something. And then how you approach every interaction, how you approach certain characters, or how you approach entire factions, it might actually drastically change your entire experience. For instance, in Fallout New Vegas, there are several different factions you can join, and you'll get completely unique characters and quest lines depending on which faction you choose. And if you choose a certain faction over another one, that other one is going to want nothing to do with you. If you choose Caesar's Legion, almost the whole wasteland's going to freaking hate you. But there's plenty of other factions and decisions that also have a huge impact on the game and how everyone in the world is going to view you. There's also karma in plenty of the other Fallout games, which also affects the replayability. Do you want to be an asshole? Do you want to be nice? There's just a lot of customization. It's why there are a lot of people who have played through really every Fallout game several times just to see all the different options, see what different routes there are, and really, again, almost the entire series has this. Even Fallout 76 has a few choices you get to make. Nowhere near as many as, the real Fallout games, but it just goes to show that even in one of the worst Fallout games, there's still choices to make, there's still some replayability, and I'm sure if you've played through New Vegas or Fallout 3 or 4 or even the first two, you've thought about going back to replay it, or you might have already replayed it, or you're one of those people that have played through these games several different times. Either way, totally worth replaying. A bunch of new stuff will show up the second, third, fourth, fifth time you play through it. And so here we have Mega Man. Now, outside of the RPGs, really like every Mega Man game is replayable to some extent, just thanks to the fact that you get to choose which robot master you want to go after. So the order of the bosses and stages are almost always going to be different. Outside of those last few stages, those are always going to be the same. So out of the entire Mega Man series, which do I think is the most replayable Mega Man game? I'm probably going to go with the fan favorite, Mega Man 2. This is the one that I've personally replayed the most, and it really just never gets old for me. It's one of my favorite platformers ever, and I feel like I could come back to this game over and over and always have a great time with it. I've played through it several times now, and I always try to do the order differently so it mixes things up, and depending on the order you take, the game's difficulty can actually drastically change. Certain areas become way easier if you have certain robot abilities, and areas that might have given you trouble in the past might not give you like any trouble now, or you just get the metal blades and just completely annihilate everything. Of course, my first playthrough I went for the metal blades, but I actually found the playthroughs where you don't go for the metal blades immediately to be far more interesting. On top of this, the runtime is pretty short. I mean, it's an NES game. You can probably beat it in like an hour or two. On your first time, it'll probably take a few hours since there is some trial and error. The game still does have a decent amount of challenge. Not as much as other Mega Man games, but this game certainly has a bit of a bite. And when it comes to those short but sweet replayable experiences on the NES, I think Mega Man 2 really is at the top. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of great NES games worth replaying, but Mega Man 2 is probably my favorite of those. Or Super Mario Bros. 3, that game, that's a really good one, but we're talking about Mega Man 2. It's a really solid game that is worth replaying, and I'm sure if you've played through the game once, you've thought about going back and playing it again, or you've just played through it again. And so here we have a game I don't talk nearly enough about, and that is God Hand. Yes, if you don't remember God Hand, that is the crazy beat 'em up that came out very late in the PS2's lifespan, and was the last game developed by Clover Studio. They would be shuttered after and eventually would go on to make Platinum Games. And this game has very similar replayability to almost all of Platinum's games, including Bayonetta, which I talked about earlier. This game, it is a beat 'em up, and it isn't replayable because there's all these different paths to take or different story beats or characters or choices or anything like that. It's replayable for almost the same reason that Bayonetta is replayable, because you get ranks and the game really rewards you and incentivizes you to get incredibly good and familiar with its systems. The first time you play through the game, you're really just kind of figuring things out, how the combat works, and enjoying all of its wacky shit. But the second time you play through the game, oh, you're absolutely ready. You know how everything works, you're familiar with the systems, and you can really start whooping some ass and getting some good rankings. But it doesn't end there. God Hand actually has adaptive difficulty, and it's actually some of the best adaptive difficulty I've ever seen in a game, where if you start doing really good, the enemies start getting way tougher, and the game actually does get incredibly difficult. Like, this can be one of the hardest games on the PS2. where at first, yeah, it seems a bit difficult, but if you start getting really good, the game will start absolutely kicking your ass. Even if you're not good, the game's going to kick your ass, and that adaptive difficulty makes the game even more replayable, where you're going to want to play through this entire game, and you're going to want to try to do it on like the hardest difficulty, not get hit, get the best score, and of course just absolutely pummeling the shit out of everything. The combat actually has a decent amount of depth here, and is just immensely satisfying, especially when you start doing some of the crazy shit. Like, this game has been underrated for nearly 20 years now, and I'm here to say that if you've played it, play it again. It's going to be even better that second time. This game desperately needs a modern re-release. The best way to play it is on the PS3 store, and yeah, that's not exactly modern, but if you play this game, you're probably going to want to play it again. So here's a game you're probably decently familiar with, Cyberpunk 2077. Now, I could sit here all day and complain about the game's launch or some of the issues it had, but it's 2024, most of the issues have been fixed, and we do have a pretty stellar game here, and a very replayable stellar game. Like most big RPGs, you get to really immerse yourself into this world, you get to customize your character, you get to choose their background, and depending on which background you choose, you'll get a few different missions at the beginning, but you'll also get special dialogue choices, and then as you're playing through the game, you'll be presented with characters, situations, and consequences depending on which actions you take. You get to make a good amount of choices throughout the game, and while some of them really don't mean all that much, there are plenty that absolutely have some serious ramifications, if not immediately, then much later in the game, and they absolutely can affect the ending. There's also several quests that you can complete in different ways, and you'll get completely different outcomes, and those can actually affect the main game as well. And so all of this leads to the game being quite replayable. I replayed it because I played it at launch and it was fucking awful, and I played the PS5 version, it was a lot better, but what I actually did that second time was I did completely different choices, I did a different background, and I had a pretty decently different experience. Sure, there are plenty of moments, story beats, characters, interactions that are going to be exactly the same. I mean, that's just how it is for most games, but there are plenty of areas where things are genuinely different, and you can get some very different endings. The endings in particular are probably the most different, at least in my opinion. There's also the DLC. I haven't really messed around with the DLC, but I am certain it is just as replayable as the rest of the game, with plenty of different choices, outcomes, and certain characters might hate you, they might love you. You gotta find out. And if you don't like the outcome, you can just replay the game and get completely different outcomes for the most part. It's a pretty great game now, and it's cool that it is so replayable. So this next entry is not one game, not two games, not three games, not an entire series. It's really just an entire company's portfolio from like 2009 and on, outside of one game. And so what am I even talking about? I'm talking about nearly every FromSoft game from Demon's Souls and on. These are some of the most replayable games ever. I'm talking Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring, all of the DLC for those games. But not just the Souls games either. Armored Core 5, Armored Core 5 Verdict Day, Armored Core 6, these are all incredibly replayable games. The only From Software game that has come out since 2009 that is not replayable is their VR game, and yeah, that game's not really worth mentioning. So outside of that, yes, all of these games are incredibly replayable. I've played through some of these games several times over, and you can have completely different experiences with them. The biggest reason that these games are replayable is your build. Outside of Sekiro, you can have completely different builds for all of these games, and your gameplay can actually drastically change. For instance, in Dark Souls, if you want to be up close and personal, be rolling all over the place and attacking with a big heavy weapon, that's going to play completely different if you're, say, a serious magic user. And this goes all the way back to Demon's Souls. If you're a ranged person, it plays completely different than a melee focused build. And Elden Ring, man, oh man, I feel like you could have tons upon tons of different builds for that game. That game has a crazy amount of replayability just because there's so much customization when it comes to where you want to go next, which bosses you want to take on, the order, and then of course your build. But there's a reason so many people have played through Dark Souls or played through Bloodborne or Elden Ring 2, 3, 4, 5 times, because you can have such drastically different playthroughs. Sure, you might fight the same bosses, you might go through the same levels, but how you do everything can be a bit different depending on your build. And when it comes to Armored Core, yeah, you can just have a completely different build, and all of these missions can feel very different from each other. Sure, there are some builds that are just like stupid good that work for almost every mission, but for the most part, you'll get to have different builds. And if you replay the game, you can have completely different mechs that feel wildly different from each other, and it's really cool just how different the mechs can feel. And so From Software games, very, very replayable. I've played through Dark Souls more than once. I've played through most of these games more than once, and I really just love them to death. They're so good, and you're always finding new nooks and crannies and secrets in them, and it just feels like the game is always giving you something new. Even on like your 5th playthrough, and I'm sure anybody that's played through any of the Dark Souls has thought about going back and doing another run, or has already done it, because it really is that fun. So here we got a game you're probably familiar with. We have The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I totally could have included Tears here, but I'm really just going with Breath of the Wild. I remember when this game came out, people not only went nuts for it and said it was amazing, but after they beat it, they immediately booted the game back up again and played through it again. And that's because it's incredibly replayable. Sure, when it comes to the story, it's not monumental, there's no choices to be made. In fact, the story is the weakest part of this game in my opinion. Where it's incredibly replayable is the order. And what do I mean by order? I mean the order in which you do literally anything in this game. You can go do whatever the hell you want, wherever you want, in whatever order you choose once you get off the tutorial island. Like, sure, it kind of is like, hey, maybe you should go to this area, or it suggests where you should go, but you really can go do whatever you want, and the game will let you do it. It doesn't lock anything off with like story progression or key items or weapons or upgrades. No, legit, you can go do anything in the game from the moment you start the game and get off the tutorial island. Like, if you want, you can even go fight the final boss immediately. You can even beat him. It's hard as shit, but you can go do it. And I know that there are plenty of people who have played through this game a few times now. Like, the first time they played through the game, they went in the recommended order. The second time, they went in the opposite order. The third time, they just went after Ganon immediately. You can totally mix it up here. Like, thanks to just how open the game is and the level of freedom that you get is just so incredible that, yeah, it's incredibly customizable how you play through the game, and thanks to that, it's incredibly replayable just kind of by default. Like, you can play through this game tons of different ways. There's really creative problem solving, and it absolutely is the same case for Tears, but I have not replayed through Tears yet, so I can't confirm that it's as replayable as Breath of the Wild. All I can say is that both games are very, very big with a lot to see. You can spend 100, 200 hours easy in these games, and I'm sure you'll actually really enjoy it. And if you go back and play it again, you can actually have it be pretty different. And so here we have a game that I feel like doesn't get enough love, and that is Star Ocean: The Second Story, specifically the remake that came out last year. Now, I never messed around with the original game, but I played through this remake and I quite enjoyed it, and I immediately saw that yes, this is a very replayable game. Now, why is it replayable? Mostly for the story. At the beginning of the game, you get to choose between two different characters, and the story will play out pretty different depending on which character you choose. So that already adds some replayability. You're going to want to play through it twice to get everything, but after that, there's even more replayability because the story can actually change depending on which characters you have join you. Throughout the game, you are given plenty of chances to go get characters, and there's no way you can get every character to actually join your party. It's just not possible, and so you'll want to replay through the game if you want to experience the other characters and that part of the story. And look, I'm not going to act like the story or the characters are drastically different from each other like some of the other games I've talked about today, but it's to the point that yes, you would want to replay the game if you want to experience everything, see all of the characters, and really get a full understanding of this world. I have yet to replay it, but I hope one day in the future I'm able to replay it. The combat is also pretty fun. You can customize how your characters are going to act as well, and you get to customize which party members you want in battle, so that adds even more customization, therefore more replayability. And the game's also quite replayable thanks to its length. This isn't some massive 50, 60, sometimes 100-hour RPG. No, this game is like 15 to 20 hours, maybe like 25 hours if you really take your time. It does not take an eternity. You can finish this game in like a week and then replay it again, and it won't take anywhere near as long. Especially when you understand the systems and how to break said systems, then you'll finish the game real quick, but it is quite replayable, and I think it is a good one. And so here we have a very personal pick. We have the original Pikmin. I'm sure compared to a lot of the other games on this list that this isn't the most replayable game, but as a kid, I played through this game so many times. I played through it like 5 or 6 times. I love the original Pikmin, and I think it's very replayable. Sure, there aren't a ton of different paths to take. You can't alter the story or the characters or the arcs or anything like that, but what this game has is a good runtime, pacing, and there are a few different ways you can approach the game. You're tasked with getting 30 ship parts, and you only actually need 25. in order to beat the game, but you can of course try to get all 30. You only have 30 in-game days though to get all of these parts, and so where it's replayable is choosing which parts you want to get and what order you want to go in. You don't have to go in the same order every single time. Outside of the first few ship parts, you can go in pretty much any order when it comes to a lot of these, and so I've had playthroughs where I didn't get this one ship part pretty quick. I got it later in the game, and vice versa. And so the order can be mixed up a little bit. Another thing that makes the original Pikmin really replayable in my opinion is trying to beat the game in as few in-game days as possible. I think this is a pretty common challenge for people who play Pikmin 1. That first time you play through the game, you might use up all 30 days to get all of the parts. Maybe you'll do it in like 28, 29 days, but the question then comes, how many days do I really need to beat the original Pikmin? Can you get all of the ship parts in like 10 days, 15 days? And then the game's actually pretty short too. On your first time it might take like 6-7 hours, but you can beat this game in just a few hours. I know I have, and I think the fewest amount of days I've beaten the original Pikmin is like 12 days or something. One of my friends did like 9, which is crazy, but I've replayed through this game several times just trying to get all of the parts in as few days as possible. There's even a secret little challenge boss that shows up if you're super quick. Pikmin 2 and 3 and 4 also have a decent amount of replayability, but nothing's gonna ever top that original for me personally. Again, a very personal choice, but I gotta have at least one really personal choice on this list. It is my list after all. So for this entry, we got another series of games, and that series is the Hitman series. Really, from the original game all the way up to the latest release, Hitman 3, these games have been crazy replayable. And they're all replayable for the exact same reason. There's tons of different ways to take out these targets. Sure, in like the original, there's only like 1 or 2 different ways, but as you get further along in this series, more and more options show up, and you get to be more and more creative. Especially in the latest Hitman trilogy, the modern games, there are so many different ways you can take out these targets. You can play through some of these missions 3, 4, 5 times and take out your target completely different ways. You could be boring and just walk up and shoot them. You could snipe them from afar. You could poison them. There's several other ways that you can get them killed. You can make it look like an accident. The games let you get as creative as you want. The sandboxes that the Hitman games provide is great stuff, and it really is just incredibly replayable. I don't think any stealth series can even touch the Hitman series when it comes to replayability. Sure, in Splinter Cell, there's a little bit of replayability, you know. Did you get spotted? Are you going in guns blazing? Metal Gear, there's even more replayability, especially MGS5 with so many different options, but they can't touch the Hitman series. Like, these games just have a stupid amount of replayability. Even some of the lesser games in the series, the ones that people don't care all that much for, like Absolution, are still incredibly replayable. I've replayed Absolution because I wanted to see all the different ways I could complete those missions or take out those targets, and it's incredibly entertaining stuff here. It's not like it's boring ways to take out the targets. They get incredibly creative, wacky, and just sometimes incredibly funny. Like, it is funny how strange and weird these games can get, and the ways that you take out some of these targets are some of the most unconventional ways anyone can be killed in a video game. And part of the fun really is figuring it out for yourself and just messing around with everything. Of course, you could be boring and just shoot them or look it up, but where's the fun in that? A lot of the fun really is in just fucking around and finding out. And that's why people love the Hitman series. There's also that roguelike mode that is pretty good, but I'm not including roguelikes on here. The Hitman series, crazy replayable. Alright, a list like this, you knew I had to include Sonic somewhere, so for this entry, I'm going with Sonic 3 and Knuckles. A lot of Sonic games are incredibly replayable. All of the classic games, a bunch of the 3D games, but in my opinion, the most replayable Sonic game of them all has always been Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Sonic Mania is very close. It is very, very close, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles, man, I've played through this game so many times, whether I was a kid, a teenager, as an adult. I find myself coming back to this game every few years just because it is so replayable. And there's a few different reasons as to why the game is so replayable. You get to choose between 3 different characters at the start of the game, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, and all 3 of them are drastically different. The way you play through this game will be completely different depending on the character you choose. And then the main reason I've replayed this game so many times, the level design. The level design is killer. It is peak Sonic out here. There are so many different paths to take. The upper areas, the lower areas, the middle areas, all the nooks and crannies, finding all of the hidden rings to do the bonus stages. The level design is so good. It feels like there are tons of different ways to complete a lot of these levels. It feels like every time I play through this game, I find a new route, I find a new area, I find a new bonus stage ring. Like, the game just keeps giving me more and more reasons to come back. The level design is just so good. It feels like there's so much to see and so many things to find, and I really do love it. There's really not like any bad levels here either. There's a few levels I don't care for all that much, but even at its worst, I think the game still is great levels, and I think even the biggest Sonic haters can agree that, yeah, the levels are pretty good in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Again, most Sonic games are decently replayable, but none of them hit just like Sonic 3 and Knuckles do. The pacing, the length of the game, it all just makes it so replayable. Man, if you take a shot every time I say the word replayable or replay in this video, you're gonna be fucking dead. That's what you're gonna be. I've said this word so many times, but I mean, that's the topic of the video. Dead though. And so here we have a little known indie game you may or may not have heard of. It is known as Skyrim. It's a massive RPG by Bethesda that has been released several times over, and yeah, it's incredibly replayable. This is one of the biggest games ever made, and it very much is one of those games that you can just lose hundreds of hours in, especially if you do a second, third, or fourth playthrough. And there's plenty of reasons why you'd want to do so many playthroughs. Obviously, your background and how you customize your character does affect a little bit of the game, but like most Bethesda games, you actually get to make choices and you actually get to side with factions and characters, and this will affect the world. It'll affect how other characters view you, and depending on who you side and don't side with, you might actually get special quest lines, special lines of dialogue. There's a lot of customization here, and I've played through Skyrim a few times, and I always try to do something different. I always try to join different factions, see different characters, and no two playthroughs are ever going to be the same. And that's why when you're finally awake,
Not supposed to. Hey, you're finally awake.
you can have a lot of fun with this Skyrim game. Look, people have been talking about this game pretty much non-stop since it came out, and we're all waiting for the next Elder Scrolls. I could be here all day telling you about how replayable Skyrim is. You already know that. It's way more replayable than Starfield, that's for sure. Starfield is not on this list. I do not think that's a replayable game. Elder Scrolls, though, pretty much all of them are replayable, but we're going to pick the easy pick and go with Skyrim. Okay, so you knew I couldn't make an entire list about replayable games and not include at least one horror game. There are plenty of replayable horror games, Silent Hill, Dead Space, but when it comes to replayability and horror, oh, it's gotta be Resident Evil. Resident Evil is just the king and queen, actually, in this aspect. Really, all of the main series is replayable, from that original game all the way up to RE8 and all of the remakes. But when it comes to what I believe to be the most replayable, I think it's Resident Evil 2. Whether it's the original or the remake, it doesn't really matter. I mostly have stuck to the remake, but the original has plenty of replayability as well. Obviously, there's the two different characters, Leon and Claire, and they both have different campaigns. There's the two different sides, A side, B side, playing through each of them as the characters. There's different difficulties. You can unlock a bunch of little extras and try to finish it as fast as possible. And I think just due to RE2's really solid pacing, excellent level design, and how things just keep moving along, it's the most replayable. You also get some really fun rewards if you actually play through the game a few times, and it's just one of those games I find myself coming back to every few years. It's not my favorite Resident Evil game. I think it's always going to be RE4, and while RE4 is incredibly replayable, remake or not, it's also like 2 or 3 times the length. And I feel like at times the pacing, yeah, it's not as good. I think RE2 is like the perfect game when it comes to replayability and horror. It's a game that you'll want to play through several times over, even when you know all the solutions to the puzzles and you've done the A side, B side with both characters. And it really goes to show that this is just a masterclass of a game. Whether it's horror or just gaming in general, this game, oh, it's so good. And if you really haven't tried it, like at this point in time, if you have not tried it, please, what on earth are you waiting for? It's cheap, it's on Game Pass, it's so worth it. And so here we have a game I don't talk nearly enough about, and that is the original Dishonored. Now, I played this way back when it came out, and I thought it was just brilliant, and have actually gone back to the game and seen that it absolutely holds up, and it's incredibly replayable. I feel like immersive sims are actually really great for replayability just because there's so many different ways you can approach just about everything, and I think the Dishonored might be the best of them all. I also haven't played the later Deus Ex games. I did play the original, and yeah, the original is absolutely replayable, but Dishonored, oh, this game is like immersive sim royalty out here. It is so good when it comes to approaching these levels and taking out these targets in different ways. A majority of the game, the objective is to take out a target, and kind of like Hitman, you're given a few different ways to take out said target. You can be boring, but there are plenty of creative ways. It doesn't get as weird and kooky as Hitman, but there's still a few different ways to take out just about every target. But a lot of the gameplay is, getting to the target, going through these areas, and yeah, there's a bit of customization and replayability here. You can go in guns blazing and using all of your tools and just killing everybody, annihilating everything, and it's a ton of fun. The combat is actually pretty solid in the original Dishonored. I feel like most people don't even get to use the combat to the fullest, but if you want to go in and just kill everyone, yeah, that's really good. And then of course you can be stealthy, and when you're stealthy you don't have to kill everybody. You can just sneak by them, or you can take everyone out in stealth. That's an option too. There's plenty of replayability there. Do you want to just kill everybody? Do you want to not kill everybody? There are some serious ramifications if you actually do start killing everybody. And it can even affect the ending. Sure, it really doesn't change the story or characters or what's going to happen all that much, but it's just a nice little wrinkle. The game is worth a second playthrough. Dishonored 2 is about as replayable as the first one. You even get 2 different characters, but I don't know, the first one just hits different, and so that's why I'm going with it. So for the last entry on today's list, we have the Mass Effect trilogy. I'm sure you're all familiar with this series, and like the other RPGs I've talked about, this game is mostly replayable thanks to the choices that you can make during the game, who you align with, which companions you befriend or even potentially romance, and how you deal with certain situations make these games replayable. Something that's pretty cool about this trilogy is stuff that you do in the first game can actually affect the second and the third game, assuming, you play them all on the same hard drive or the same disc or however you're playing them, as long as they're all unified. And so that's a really neat touch, and it really does incentivize you playing through the entire trilogy. The Witcher games kind of do that, but they don't do it anywhere near as well as the Mass Effect trilogy. On top of that, you can customize your character and your build a little bit, so that adds, further replayability. You can have a slightly different build. It doesn't change the gameplay all that much. Most of the replayability comes from the story and the characters, and I mean, the writing, the world building, and the story is so good that you'll probably want to see all aspects of it, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you replay. And it's worth it because this is a great trilogy. But that's enough for today's video. I've talked about replaying games for quite a while now. I've given y'all plenty of examples of games that are worth replaying. Hopefully this video was what you were looking for. I hope you all have a wonderful day. If you made it to this part of the video, you can comment the code word, which is going to be strawberry, as in the fruit. I'm really craving some strawberries right now. Like, I don't know, I'm just really feeling it. I'm gonna go get some, honestly, after I'm done recording this. So that's the code word. You made it to the end of the video, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night, evening, morning, holiday, whatever the hell's closest to you. Bye-bye now.